Hi, welcome to Cyber Thoughts, the podcast where we explore the market of cybersecurity through leaders in the field. Today, I'd like to welcome Maxime Lamothe-Brassard, the founder and CEO of Lima Charlie, one of Lytical's companies. Hey, Max, how's it going?
Hey, really good. Thanks. How about yourself?
It's awesome. It's a great day in New York. It's a little rainy, but otherwise lovely. So,
Nice of you.
why don't we start out with origin stories? How did you get into cybersecurity?
Yeah. So I got in cybersecurity right out of university. Cybersecurity is the only thing I've ever done. So as a background, right? I don't have sort of one of those interesting stories where I don't know, I was a lawyer and then I totally changed everything. It's I so right out of university, I got in security by working for the Canadian government, a place called CSE. It's okay, nobody's ever heard of it. It's the NSA in Canada. Even Canadians never heard of it. So worked in the Five Eyes. I guess I kind of lied. I started as a Java developer internally in university when I did my like work terms. But as you can imagine, if you're like, I was working on stuff like parking web apps. And so you work for the NSA building parking web apps, parking management. I didn't want to like keep doing that for long. It was just too attractive to explore all the other cool stuff being done. So I approached the person doing like all the work terms and really pushed like for a couple of work terms to be able to get into the cool groups. And I got in eventually, and it was really like a mind blown kind of moment because I'd really found the greenfield kind of space where I could just go wild. I was able to. I didn't know anything about security. I didn't know anything about like low level, development or reverse engineering or any of those things. And I was pretty much just like thrown in the ocean and told like, just go wherever you'd like and do as much as you can. And I was told like, actually, whatever you do, it's not going to be used. So we're just evaluating what you can do. So for me, that was like the perfect thing. Um, so I did a ton of crazy stuff over kind of that winter, and yeah, it was clear from that moment on this is where I kind of belong. And so I worked there for several years, did a bunch of things internally, did some operations, some development, some more CI type stuff, so lots of amazing stuff. And I kind of reached a point where I didn't know at the time, but now, hindsight, you kind of learn yourself. And I've always been a very much an N+1 kind of person. And so I found like, okay, I can feel the envelope of being in the government here. I want to go and kind of expand a little bit the, the scope of what I'm working on. And so I moved to CrowdStrike. So it was back in the early days of CrowdStrike, like pre-product CrowdStrike,
How
which
many people
is
were there at that point?
about 100 people.
Okay.
Yeah. So it was like it wasn't the tiny company, but it was not the juggernaut that it is today. Uh, so I did a bunch of architecting of the early security operations center, which was kind of a build up from a lot of things that I'd done in the government around counter CNE, so detecting the bad guys.
For
Um,
those of us who don't know, CNE,
Computer network exploitation.
beautiful.
Um,
Breaking into stuff.
so yeah, it's like it's looking and detecting other hackers, nation state hackers, not directly for the purpose of like defending the way the blue team does it, but in a similar way as traditional counterintelligence would do it, right? So from the perspective of understanding that opponent and their technology and being able to see where they're going and what they're doing, what their intent is, all that cool stuff. Um, Fascinating. I mean, yeah, government, there's some downsides to government, but the mission is by far, you don't get quite that anywhere else.
Awesome.
So yeah, early CrowdStrike, eventually made my way again, kind of N+1-ing, and made my way to Google internal security. And that was fascinating. I mean, it's kind of like sort of like a government in many aspects. So, a really large organization, but a caliber of people. I mean, government really high caliber throughout my career, everywhere I've been. But at such a large organization to have the caliber of people there, especially internal security, at Google was very, it was not surface, right? Like people after the what was it? Was it Aurora? Like
Aurora,
the
yeah.
big incident, in circa 2001, I want to say. Maybe it was later. I jumbled the dates. But I was after that.
I was going to say,
So
I think Aurora is like 2009, 2010, because I was at Adobe for that. And so I
that
think it's
makes more sense,
2010, but yeah.
yeah, that's gonna be it. So they learned their lesson, and they were like pretty deep into that stuff. So that was really cool. And got a bunch of experiences, honestly, that again in hindsight were pretty important for me in what I did later on, around like evaluating products for the use of Google internal security and all that stuff. And while I was there, I heard about a thing that was getting started in Google X, which at the time, I'm super vague about it because at the time it was this vague. It was, I kind of got in touch with them and it was like, hey, Google X does moonshots. We want to do a moonshot in cybersecurity. That's it. Like, that's the scope. That's the mission. So I was like, as soon as I heard about that, like, yep, all in. So I joined them. That was Project Lantern for a good 1 or 2 years before it pivoted into, or in X terms, it's like graduated. So it graduated as Chronicle Security. So that was also a very fascinating experience where, you're kind of a sort of a startup within Google, but you start off with 40 million in funding. So it's not quite like the startups. It's this weird environment. So that was really cool. And that's the point where I decided to go and kind of start something. Sorry, I feel like maybe I'm getting ahead.
No, you're fine. You're
Happy to keep going.
No, you've served up on a silver platter. So, okay, so you're at Google and you decide you want to start your own thing. You hit yourself in the head. Like, what made you think, hey, I want to leave the safety and security of Google to go start my own company?
Yeah, it's security has a bunch of different weird weird functions, limiting functions around what it does. And part of that ideation that we'd been doing at X, right, was like, hey, how do we kind of go beyond that scope? And a lot had kind of percolated for me at that point. I had built an open source EDR. So EDR is endpoint detection and response. Think like Carbon Black and CrowdStrike, that type of tool. It's something that I've done many times in the past in my career. So I had that in my back pocket, and Chronicle was graduating, which meant kind of a big shift in like how things were being done, and like even as simple as like changing contracts and all that stuff. And I felt like, okay, it's my N+1 moment. There's only 1+1 left out there, and it's starting a company. And I was at the point where in my career I'd done a lot, and I really felt like I had to go and do something that had the potential to have a really, really, really large impact. Nothing's ever guaranteed. It's not like, hey, I have this $1 billion idea. It's a sure thing. It was a lot more around, I'd been, I don't know, I can't count the years, but many, many, many years at that point in security. I'd seen a bunch of different environments. I could feel that there's a lot of legacy still in cybersecurity. There's a lot of people doing things the way that they've been doing it for the past 20 years. And some things have changed, but a lot hadn't, especially in the vendor space. I kind of mentioned, while I was at Google, this kind of review of like EDR, so endpoint detection and response vendors that we were looking at for Google. And everybody was just selling the blinking red light that I like to call it, right? This like, hey, this is a tool. You just give it to whoever, and now they're like fighting the Russians, like prevent everything magically. And I was like, I knew at that point enough to know that this, for most people, it's kind of BS. And especially for somebody like Google. So I was kind of seeing all of these points that were just telling me like, yeah, there's got to be something that can be done. And if I'm going to spend, the next X number of years, I might as well do it for something that could, I hate the cliche. I hate it, but like not change the world, but like change security fundamentally. That's really what I'm in for.
Okay, so this is perfect because we've touched on it, but what is the idea of Lima Charlie? And then what gave you that idea? So you want to do something different, you want to fundamentally kind of break things and start new, but like give us the meat of that.
Yes. So the meat of it is this realization. Again, it's not really like a single aha moment I can point to as much as a lot of experience and then getting at the point when you're starting something where you really start to do that introspection and like looking at a macro level, what's happening. And the realization was that in security, everybody is reinventing the wheel to a very, very, very large extent. A lot of innovation is necessary. A lot of innovation is happening, but there's a lot around cybersecurity that isn't innovation anymore. That the industry has learned and matured a lot about the types of tools that it employs, and it just I could see the wasted effort by a lot of people, a lot of like really, really bright people reinventing the wheel. So, starting a new company or just building a security posture within an organization and rebuilding a ton of different types of systems that had been built 100 times before. Seeing new vendors pop up and before getting to the point where they could really innovate, they had just so much work to do to go and like our first example was EDR was an agent, right? Like having an agent, everybody hates the number of agents that they have. And so, you're a startup, you kind of had to go and reinvent that. If you were an enterprise, you had to go and see a bunch of different vendors, each vendor pretending that they're the end all be all. They have the secret ML blockchain AI silver bullet to do it all. And in reality, at that point in my career, I kind of knew that a lot of like things like the EDR really aren't secret sauce anymore. So why was that happening? So very specifically, that was happening because those vendors that did have those technologies were treating it as a silo, right? You just had a bunch of products that, in my mind, at this stage of maturity in the industry, shouldn't be products and companies. They should be features. So if you're a new company, you kind of had to reinvent the wheel because every other vendor was just putting a price point on what they were building and kind of this silo, this walled garden. And so that's when I kind of had this realization that what would fundamentally change the equation of like the bedrock of a ton of not features, but products and capabilities and security was this idea of having a cloud provider type of feel or type of company for the fundamentals of cybersecurity. And what that meant was we started with EDR because we had an EDR in our back pocket, but it was this idea that, look, we're going to break all assumptions of 99% of vendors in that space. We're going to build a cloud provider. And what that means is, everything is API first and self-service and OEM friendly and build per usage, which right there, like we're not even talking technology, but right there was different than 99%. And by having this fundamentally open public cloud, public infrastructure with those characteristics, every product that we put on top of that, every primitive or capability, is now something that a huge number of people can use and can use in a way that's compatible for them. So, some startups are able to build their products on top of what we do. And we have companies that are growing, right? They're not like 3 guys anymore, right? It's like they have a security team. They know what they're doing. They want to set up their security posture. They're not forced to go and buy from 50 different vendors, large pre-planned contracts for walled gardens, like that whole thing. Instead, they can go with kind of the AWS concept of just saying, like, I'm going to go to a public cloud, get what I need as I need it. It's just going to work, and I can plug it together and just go. And that changes a lot the fundamental equations of how a lot of things work in cybersecurity. So I'm super excited about the solutions that we build because I'm an engineer, the things we put on that. But I would say equally excited just at the ability to provide this kind of common operational environment for a ton of people in a very open way that people can just build things that we never thought about and just be that accelerator for a ton of companies.
Very,
So that's
very
kind of mine.
cool.
Yeah.
All right, so I'm going to take you in a different direction. You're clearly a very technical founder. I've got to watch your progress, but how did you go from having a product to the sales side of the house, right? Get that first set of kind of revenue and then build it up to where you are now.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, for a technical founder, at least talking about my experience, like that's the challenge, right? The way that we did it is, I guess the first kind of broad statements about it is, we had a vision, so we knew where we were going, but we knew that there was no straight line to this, right? Many years, it's not that long ago when we started. If we ever talked about that vision, we would just get a lot of blank stares for people. It was just too different to say it was too different to be kind of a quick, understanding, and the product wasn't there. Meaning we had this EDR, that's where we started. It was our EC2, right? We had this EDR as like a primitive in a cloud type environment, but it's not super clear. You're not a cloud provider yet if all you have is like one primitive. So we wanted to be really careful about growing into that vision and really, really avoiding all the side quests. Meaning, we've had so many people over the years that we talked to that were like, "Hey, thing is really, really cool. You should go and make this really easy for level 1 analysts to go and do this and that," and kind of bringing us down a side quest, like a different road. And fundamentally, our statement was always, the pot of gold is in the big vision, and we need to become this cloud provider. And to do that, we have to be careful not to kind of go into a different pigeonhole. So we started early on with less customers, but customers that were really, really, really good fit for what we were building. So that was a lot of really technically deep companies and users that were using the EDR. And they were happy to have this really, really tight feedback loop about the product. So again, it's not like, hey, we did everything every user ever asked for, but it was this ability to just really quickly go from, oh yeah, you're trying to do that. It really fits within the vision where we're going. We're just going to do this right away and turn it around in a day. And that really made a lot of fans of what we were doing. And we had this great relationship with really technical people in the industry that had the right type of influence that we were looking for. So we kind of grew it that way initially. And then we reached a point where, yeah, that doesn't scale anymore, right? It was a point where we had to, I would describe it as level up to have salespeople. And I say salespeople in the widest possible definition. Having somebody whose job it is to go and increase sales in one way or another. And for us, what that meant wasn't so much like, hey, we're going to hire a bunch of cold callers and go and do that, because we're such a technical product. We didn't have the reputation yet to really be able to go and do top down, right? We're engineers, technical products. So doing top down, going to talk to CISOs was a really, really hard thing. We had a ton of inbound. So we hired, somebody to do demand gen, somebody to kind of oversee the sales engine, so CRO, a solution engineer. And so for us, that level 2 of sales is this idea of leveraging a lot of the product-led growth aspect to what we do, meaning inbound, self-serve, OEM friendly, scale up, scale down. Like those are all great things if you're trying to do PLG. So leverage that top of funnel. And then instead of reaching a point where we're going to go and do really, really hard sale and, let's do a 3-year contract and negotiate for a month, it really transforms into us having a discussion with people that already know what the product is. They already like it. And now we're advising them on how to transition the whole company, having those higher level discussions with them, guidance around, what's the best way of architecting, how they're using the product, all that kind of thing. So for us, that was really powerful, and it kind of really leveled us up.
So, kind of last on this, starting a company thread, what surprised you the most starting your own company?
I think it's the depth of what it means to do of the whole business side of the business. As an engineer, right? Like I kind of started out with these assumptions that the product has a ton of complexity. Sale is going to be sale. You get people like, that's a well-known process, and there's kind of a couple ways to go at it, but it's pretty simple. And really what I found is there's as much complexity in how you approach sale, how you approach the go-to-market motion, how do you, drive different optimizations, like business optimizations for different people, and structure pricing, and all that stuff is that's where I'm learning the most these days.
Awesome. All right. So kind of in the back section, I'm going to ask you questions that are generally for the InfoSec community. So if you're new to InfoSec, what resources do you love?
I think it will depend a little bit on the side of InfoSec that you're most attracted of. Like if you're into like policy stuff, I'll be honest, it's not where like my background. So I suspect it won't be as relevant, but I think still Twitter has a lot of great threads for you to pull, right? Starting to follow good people in the Twitter space, and whatever they post, interesting articles, a lot of rabbit holes that you can go down. The other one is Sigma. So Sigma is an open source community / project / rule set. So there's a lot of security rules. And the advantage of that is that it just opens up the hood for people like you've never done security. You don't really know what it's like to look for bad guys and bad behavior and interesting and weird things. This is everything in as like rules, and you can inspect those, you can understand them, you can deploy them to many different types of tools, including what we do. And I think that's really valuable to get to bare metal really fast, because one of the dangers nowadays with so many tools is to just learn a tool And I would argue that it's really important to understand the fundamentals, and then whatever tool, it's just, it's icing on the cake after.
Okay, so rapid fire here. What's your favorite book and why?
So I have probably two very different ones. So one I actually haven't finished yet, but it's already probably my favorite fiction, and that is Speaker for the Dead, in the like
Orson
Ender's
Scott
Game.
Card? Yeah.
I believe so. Yeah.
Yep.
It's just, that's my kind of sci-fi, kind of taking fundamental concepts and exploring how they translate into humanity and space travel and all that stuff. I love that. The other one that I just finished reading, which is totally different, but for me has been eye-opening, is Play Bigger, which I forget who's the writer, but look it up. One of the very, very rare business books that I actually really enjoy. I think there's a lot of like, hey, here's the recipe. And at some point you realize there's no recipe. But I think those guys kind of really build up like a case around like category definition. And for me, that really resonated. So I enjoyed that a lot.
All right, I got homework. This is one I haven't read. Finally, what's your favorite information medium? How do you like to learn?
I think for me right now, that medium is actually audiobook. Not as much because of the medium itself, but because of the place that it can take in my life. Meaning, I work a lot, right? I've discovered that I can't really like read on a computer screen or do things that are like too stimulating before bed kind of thing. So I've gotten to that point where it's got to be a downtime, before bedtime. So I'm able to just do that, put it on, lay down somewhere and kind of absorb it in a really relaxing way. So that's why it's really filled that niche really well. And it's very effective for me.
Awesome. So to end, any plugs you want to add? What do you got going on that other people should know about?
Oh yeah. I think there's two highlights that are pretty cool, that we're doing that are like super accessible for anybody. So one is, we started a podcast a little while back. It's the kind of podcast I like to listen to. So I'm very happy about, where we ended up going. So it's kind of a mix of good technical, but as well things like hacker history, which, I love war stories, right? So it's a really good podcast. It's the Defenders podcast. The other one would be, we are starting a conference. So we kind of realized that there's a bunch of security conferences for a bunch of different things, but there wasn't something that kind of fit well with the way that we think about the industry, which is we have a big focus on security, like an engineering approach to security, a innovation specific approach. So we started a conference called Mission Control, so mssnctrl.net.
Great name.
Or .org. Yeah, I really like it. I'm a big fan of like space exploration, so that's awesome. So yeah, it's going to be a really interesting conference. It's going to have a different kind of spin around innovation and kind of, the N+1 that is the core of what I do. So.
And what was the URL for that one more time? I'll make sure to get in the show notes too.
Yes, mssnctrl. I want to say org. Yeah.
All right. I'll put it in the show notes. No worries.
Thank you.
Well, Max, thank you for taking the time to be with us today. We really appreciate having you here.
My pleasure.